Hello everybody, my name is Kat and welcome back to my channel where we talk about all things horror. I took a couple of weeks off and I'm excited to be back. And I am back with my review of Ti West's Maxxxine, which is the conclusion to the X trilogy that he began like what, 2 years ago now? So Maxxxine was definitely one of my most anticipated movies of this year. I've said it a lot on this channel before, but I love Ti West. He's one of my favorite contemporary horror filmmakers. Some people will probably disagree with me on this, but I think he's one of the few filmmakers that consistently puts out really great horror work. And I absolutely loved both X and Pearl when it came out. If you're curious, I will link my review to both of those movies in the description. I thought both X and Pearl were both really great homages to like 1970s exploitation horror films. And then you have Pearl, which is a really nice throwback to like classic Hollywood cinema. They were good homages while also doing their own thing, right? And really creating this interesting character study between these two characters, Maxxxine and Pearl, both played by the incredible Mia Goth. I thought X was very transgressive in terms of its depiction of sexuality on screen. We don't get a lot of mainstream films that are like that anymore, so it actually felt very refreshing and like something new. And then you have Pearl, which in many ways, to me at least, felt like an almost modern female gothic tale and felt very relevant for just the weird isolation pandemic times that we were in when the film was released. So I think both films, while being throwbacks, also offered really interesting commentaries on like the current state of our culture. And so I was very excited to see how Ti West was going to wrap up this storyline in Maxxxine. So I saw this yesterday and I will say, while I was watching it, I was having a lot of fun with the film, right? I really enjoyed the world that Ti West was bringing us into. There's certainly a lot of great scenes in this film. There's certainly a lot to admire about it. That being said, it's kind of one of these films where the more I think about it, the more like the premise just starts to fall apart for me. Because I just kind of had this nagging feeling. I was like, something just felt like it was missing here. So I've kind of thought about why that was, and I'm just going to share my thoughts here as to what didn't quite work for me with this film. But before we get into that, let's talk about what does work in this movie, because there's certainly a lot of things about Maxxxine to admire. Probably the thing that I like the most about this movie, that I like about most Ti West films, is the aesthetics of it. I've said this before in other reviews, but I feel like Ti West, he's really able to create a atmosphere that really does feel like the time period it's supposed to be set in. And it's more than just like, okay, we're gonna throw some like grainy effects on the image to try to give it that old film feel. Like, it's not just that, but it's also like in the camera positioning, right? How you're using like long shots, how you're using like zoom ins or pans, right? He puts a lot of intention into how he's framing the images to give it that throwback feel. I just loved the look of this film. I loved being immersed in this world. So overall, I thought the aesthetics, I thought the camera work was really well done in this movie. I very much enjoyed being on the film set and following Maxxxine around the Hollywood studio lot. Like, I really loved the scene where she gets casted in this horror film and she's with the special effects team, and the special effects team are like, okay, we're gonna make a mold of your head so that we can use it later on in the film. And I loved that whole scene of them just like pouring the like clay or whatever it is on her head, and like it felt so claustrophobic and so eerie. So moments like that I really enjoyed and I thought were very creative. I also really liked that this film wasn't like a 1980s slasher movie. I know a lot of people were going into it hoping it was going to be that, but I feel like he already gave us a slasher film with X. And so this film was much more taking on a, I guess, like horror thriller feel. I got a lot of like Brian De Palma in this movie. I got a lot of David Lynch, right? Kind of Mulholland Drive, Lost Highway vibes. And this film is definitely inspired by the films of Dario Argento or Lucio Fulci or any of the other Italian Giallo films. I loved how, again, paying homage to like the Italian Giallo movies with like the colors, the playing with the reds and the blues and the purples. You have a lot of close-ups of like the knives and like the hands with the black leather gloves on them. One thing that I really admire about this trilogy is the way that Ti West is playing with these different kinds of subgenres. I really enjoyed a lot of the characters. I loved Juan Carlo Esposito's role. I loved Kevin Bacon's role in this. I didn't even know going into this Kevin Bacon was going to be in this film, but that was a nice surprise. But I loved both of those characters. I loved Juan Carlo Esposito as Maxxine's like entertainment lawyer slash agent, and they like team up together to help her try to take down this weird stalker that starts following her around and threatening her in the film. And then Kevin Bacon just plays this like really great, smarmy, like private investigator character. I think what I liked most about Kevin Bacon and Juan Carlo Esposito in this film is that they added a lot of levity to this movie. Like, they were definitely the comedic reliefs of the film. Probably one of my biggest criticisms of this movie is that at times it felt like it was taking itself maybe a little bit too seriously. I don't know, I just wasn't having as much fun with Maxxine as I had with X and Pearl. But I think that's because X and Pearl both had this kind of, you know, like whimsical feel to them almost. Like, I think of something like Pearl, right? And her whole like relationship with like her pet alligator that lives in the lake, right? She's killing the goose in the first film, and then she's just like throwing it to the alligator in this very like comical Disney princess type way. There's definitely like humor and again, this kind of playfulness to both X and Pearl that I just felt like was missing for a lot of Maxxine. And I felt like characters like Juan Carlo Esposito and Kevin Bacon, like they came in and definitely added some of that. And then speaking of characters, let's also talk about Maxxine for a minute. Now, there were times in this film where I really loved Maxxine's character a lot. And most of those times were when she was acting like a complete psychopath. This is a slight spoiler if you haven't seen the film yet. There's a scene where we see Maxxine driving and she's noticing that Kevin Bacon's character is following her. And she gets so pissed off about it. She gets out of the car. She does the thing where she takes her like keys and like puts them between her fingers as like a weapon. And then she just goes to Kevin Bacon and he's like talking to her. And then she just starts like beating the shit out of him with these like car keys. And as this is happening, you have the song St. Elmo's Fire playing in the background. And moments like that, like I loved, right? Because I felt like moments like that did have that very comedic, playful aspect that I was just talking about. As someone that grew up loving St. Elmo's Fire, both the movie and the song, I just really loved that moment in the film. I was like, yes, this is like peak feminism in cinema. Okay, not really. But it was one of those moments where like I was just having fun with Maxxine as the character, right? It was one of those moments where I feel like the film just let her go loose, and that's kind of what I was expecting her to be throughout the entire film. But she really wasn't that way throughout the entire film, which was kind of weird. Like, you have these moments that I just described where it feels like we're seeing Mia Goth in all of her glory. She's such a great actress. She has such a great presence on screen. And I honestly feel like this movie kind of wasted her. A lot of this film is her just kind of standing around and listening to other people talking at her. And she's very passive. Like, she's just kind of there and things are happening to her. Like, the whole thing is like she wants to be this Hollywood star, right? They set up at the beginning of the film that she's still in adult entertainment. She's still in the pornography industry as when we left her in X. And she's gotten pretty successful at that, but now that she's getting older, she wants to start making the transition over into actual Hollywood films. But her whole thing is like, oh, I want to be a star. I have to be the best. I have to be at the top. And so I was going into this film thinking like we were going to be following that journey. Like, we were, again, going to be seeing this kind of psychotic side of Maxxine. We already saw glimpses of that at the end of X, and you know, that whole scenario made her even more crazy and even more determined to get to the top and to reach her goals. But then we don't get that story because everything just kind of gets handed to her very easily. It's like, oh, okay, you want to roll in this horror film? Like, yeah, here's your first audition, and then you got it. Congratulations. We get a little bit, we get like a few glimpses here and there of her prepping for the role and like looking over the script and, you know, doing her research and watching other horror films. I don't even think we get a moment of her in this movie where she's actually like on set and having to act in front of a camera and like getting direction. We see other characters doing that, but we never see that with her. Like, what is this transition for her? Like, yes, she wants to make the transition from pornography to being an actual, like, legitimate actress, but does she even have the chops to do that? Like, the film is just kind of, again, like, giving her these opportunities. We don't actually, like, see her greatness. We don't see her struggling. We don't see her, like, really fighting to get to the top. Like, she keeps saying that she is. Or I thought maybe they were gonna go the route of like, okay, she is in Hollywood and she's been a successful adult actress, but now that she's getting older, she's starting to lose that X factor, right? The whole X factor that has been a running theme in all of these movies so far. Because they do set up at the beginning, like she's coming in to do this audition, and you have like the casting directors being like, okay, well, you know, you're already pretty well known within adult entertainment, like why do you want to make the transition over into Hollywood? And she says, like, oh, you know, I'm 33.
I'll be 33 years old pretty soon, and in hardcore eliminates like bread, not wine.
So I thought they were going to be playing with like the age thing maybe a little bit more, because that would also have been a throwback to X, right? When she is meeting with older Pearl, and you know, Pearl's whole thing to her in that film is like, oh, you're going to end up just like me one day, which is basically this like bitter old woman that never got to live out her dreams of being a star. We know this is a fact of the entertainment industry, that they are always looking for the next big thing and have no problem with replacing the stars that they've already established. So because they set this up at the beginning where she says like, I'm 33 and I still haven't reached my goals yet, I was kind of excited that the film was going to take that route, because I was like, okay, yes, as someone that is in their early 30s and also has no idea what they want to do with the rest of their life, I was like, thank you Mia Goth and Ty West for giving us early 30s girlies who are feeling lost in the world a film that we can hold on to, right? This is going to be our movie. And I was thinking like, okay, it's gonna be a thing where she feels like she's losing her X factor and she knows she only has like a little bit more time left to try to make the transition over into Hollywood, and that's gonna be her motivation and what propels her to reach this level of fame at all costs, no matter what it takes, no matter what crazy antics she has to do to get there. But then they didn't really do anything with that theme throughout the whole film. It kind of got like forgotten about. And I think a big reason for that is because there just wasn't enough time really for them to explore that aspect of Maxxine's character, because they're also throwing in like so many other things into this movie. So at this point, I'm going to get into spoilers for the rest of the film, because it's hard for me to talk about what didn't work, especially when we get to the third act. If you haven't seen the film yet, I would say click off, come back when you've seen the movie. I do feel like this film tried to incorporate too many different themes. We have a lot of stuff happening here with like conservative politics, like Reagan, and then there's like the Night Stalker thing. So we have this like real life serial killer running around. And then there's this whole like religious theme and people like wanting to boycott movies and boycott Hollywood because they think it's evil. And you have this whole thing with like horror films, and you know, is horror films considered like art? You also have some stuff in here with like the creation of like snuff films, right? The whole like VHS era, and then just these general themes around like the toxicness of fame. So there's just a lot happening at any given time in this movie, and I feel like that really bogged the film down. I feel like there were a lot of interesting things that Ty West was bringing up here, but a lot of it just ended up falling flat because he didn't really see one idea completely through the entire film. I was just sitting in the theater trying to soak it all in and being like, but what does it all mean? And the answer is, I don't know. I don't really know if it all adds up to like one single solitary vision. And I think that's why this film feels a little bit half-baked compared to X and Pearl. So this big reveal in the film is you discover that the character that is stalking Maxxine and killing her friends and co-workers is her father. Now, I feel like the film set that up in the beginning. Like, I don't think it was really meant to be like a shock surprise thing. I kind of figured going into the movie that it would be her dad, because they do set that up at the end of X, and it also just makes logical sense because who else would be after her? So both in X and in Maxxine, it is revealed that her father is this crazy evangelical. He's the guy that's on like TV with the mega churches and just like screaming at everyone about believing in Jesus. So he's this like crazy evangelicalist, and they very much set up at the beginning of Maxxine. He was very much training Maxxine into this mindset of being a star, right? Of wanting to be the best. We see home video footage of him directing her, essentially, right? Kind of training her.
You're gonna be the star of the church one day.
They do the whole mantra thing that they have.
I will not accept a life I do not deserve.
I do not
deserve.
He's the one that like taught her that philosophy, which I think was smart for the film to start off this way because one, it shows us their relationship, and I think it also is important because it shows that these are two characters that love the camera. These are two characters that do want to be the star, they do want to be in front of the lens, and they do want to have people that admire them and follow them. And I'm pointing that out because Ty West is also bringing in like this other thing where you do have these crazy religious fanatics throughout the whole film, who again are very much against Hollywood, very much against television, right? This idea that Hollywood is corrupting people with these ideas, the idea that film is, you know, the devil's medium. But then of course the irony of that is these same people use media to get their messages across. You have this whole thing at the end where Maxxine discovers her father and her father like kidnaps her and he's like, okay, I'm gonna perform like a live exorcism on my daughter and I'm gonna do it on television. So you're seeing all of these, you know, crazy religious cult members that are like setting up the camera equipment and setting up the lighting, very much taking on the same roles that we saw, you know, the people on the Hollywood sets doing, right? The people that the religious cult was boycotting and saying was so awful, they're doing the same thing and creating this narrative to get their ideology out to the masses. So there seems to be this kind of through line here where, yes, on the surface, you know, like the Hollywood and the porn industry, right, and all the glitz and glamour on one side, and then like the crazy religious fanatics on the other side, right? Like they're seen as two polar opposites. But I think what Ty West is like getting at here is that they're actually two sides of the same coin. And we kind of get that with like the mirroring of Maxxine and her father, right? You have both sides that are using media and using film as a way to, yes, get people's attention, but also as a way to gain like fame and power and money, right? And so I think there's like an underlying theme here where this goal for fame or infamy and power, like people knowing your name, this is a very like intoxicating idea. And it's an idea that filters out everywhere, right? It's not just like the Hollywood industry that feels it, but you also see it with this religious organization. You see it in the way that, you know, you have like real life serial killers like the Night Stalker who gain infamy and there's like a whole media circus around them and they become like pop culture figures in their own right. And again, this idea, you know, the Andy Warhol idea of like everyone's gonna be famous for 15 minutes. Again, that's a very like intoxicating idea. And so this is what we have like throughout this entire film is characters striving to get to that 15 minutes of fame and then desperately hold on to it. And so you definitely see that with Maxxine and her father. Now, where I think the film gets a little bit lost is it doesn't really flesh out that relationship. We don't get much of her dad until like the very end, like the third act. And when her father does show up, he's like this very loud, goofy kind of character. He just comes in and is like, oh yes, Maxxine, it's me. And it's like, totally, it's just very different from the rest of the movie. And I was like, why is he acting so erratic? And here's the thing, is that, you know, I was mentioning earlier the scenes where we have Maxxine and she's like going crazy and like beating people up, just acting like a legitimate psychopath. Had the film kept her character at that level throughout the rest of the film, when we then meet her dad at the end and we see that he's also this very like erratic figure, I feel like it would have made more sense, right? Because then again, you're having this like mirroring of her and her dad. It's like, okay, this is where she gets this erraticness from, is from him. And this is where the movie started to lose me, and I saw it with a couple of friends, and we were talking about the end of the film, and my friends also agreed. Like, the third act just felt very out of place and very strange. And maybe it would have been nice if we could have seen something where it was like, you know, her dad is just as obsessed with fame and stardom as she is. Again, they set this up at the very beginning of the film where we see him directing her and being like, yes, I'm gonna make you my star of the church. This is a shared dream that they had. And unfortunately, we just didn't really see the through line of that at the end of the movie. Like, I kind of wanted to see a scene where, you know, we get several moments of Maxxine where she's in her dressing room, right, or whatever, and she's getting ready. In front of the mirror, she's putting her makeup on, she's snorting her cocaine, right? She's just kind of like looking at herself and hyping herself up for, you know, whatever the scene is that she's going to be filming. And I was thinking like it might have been nice if we had a similar moment with the father, right? As he's going out to, do his televised sermons or preaching or whatever. If we had a moment like where he was also at the mirror, right? And he's also, maybe watching other like television preachers and trying to mimic what they're doing, right? Maybe he's like saying the sermons to himself in the mirror and like trying to hype himself up. Maybe we can get moments of him being like, oh, I need to look more like this guy. Like I'm going to put my makeup on as well, right? Like again, I feel like there could have been more interesting moments there. I feel like the film is setting up like, yes, he's someone that is just as fame obsessed as she is, but I think it would have been nice if we had, again, these kind of mirror moments between these two characters, right? Because then we can like really see like, this is where Maxxxine gets this, right? This is a disease in this family that has been passed down from one generation to the next, right? This need of fame and power. So I feel like we have these two characters that are like trying to achieve this unrealistic, idealized version of themselves. And I don't know, I just felt like it would have been nicer if the film had really gone and explored that route with it, because I feel like what we do get with them, it's very surface level. So yeah, I don't know, I just wanted more from like that relationship. I think it would have strengthened the third act of the film a little bit more had they done that. I would have much preferred to see her relationship with her father and learned a little bit more about her dad than some of these other characters that we got in the film. Like, the two detectives, okay, fine. We've seen characters like this in these kinds of movies before, but I just didn't need them to be as big of a presence as they were. I feel like we got a lot with like this female director that's directing this film that Maxxxine is going to be starring in. I just didn't really get like what her character was supposed to be bringing to this film. They kind of set up that she's supposed to be this like bad bitch director, but then we don't actually like see that from her. Like I think we get one scene of her scolding Maxxxine for being late to set. Okay, go on like any film set with any director and they'll be pissy about their actors showing up late. So I don't really know what her purpose was in the film, except to, I guess, I don't know, maybe give a nod to like female horror filmmakers of the time. Maybe homaging people like Stephanie Rothman, who did do horror films in the 70s and 80s. If you're someone that's interested in female directors and exploitation cinema, I would say check out some of her stuff. I'm also not quite sure like what the film was trying to say about like old Hollywood and why it was like making all these like references to old Hollywood. There's a lot of like Hitchcock being brought up in here. And again, I feel like maybe that would have made more sense if they spent a little bit more time on Maxxxine and her father's relationship, right? And how this like toxicness has just been spread throughout the family, because that's something that we also see in Psycho, right? They talk a lot about, Norman Bates and him having a very toxic relationship with his mom. But outside of that, I was just like, why are you bringing Psycho into this? Because I feel like if you're gonna mention something that has, the gravitas of something like Psycho, which is such an important film, not just in horror film history, but just film history in general, like to make that so prominent in your movie, you're bringing like all of the baggage from that film into your film. And so I was sitting there being like, okay, well, what themes from Psycho is Ti West trying to bring in here to Maxxxine? And I wasn't quite sure where he was going with that. I was also thinking like, Hitchcock was very much known for treating his films as like these kind of psychological experiments. Like if you watch his movies, they're very subtle, but there are things in there where he's kind of trying to remind you as an audience that you are watching a film. And there are times in Maxxxine, especially in the third act, where the characters are kind of acknowledging the fact that they're in a movie. Like there's a moment at the end when Maxxxine is meeting with her dad and they're going back and forth and he's saying something to her. And it's something along the lines of like, yes, I'm gonna cure you, and that's going to be the climax of the movie. And I was like, okay, well, you're saying that at the climax of the movie. So it's kind of one of those things where I was like, okay, Ti West, do you want me as the audience to acknowledge that I'm watching a movie right now? Do you want me to have that kind of realization? And if you do, why? What are you trying to tell me here? Like, I think I might know what you're getting at and what you're trying to make me think of. And I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier about how, wanting fame or attention or power or money, like that infects everything, and how we use media to try to get these things. Like, that's actually a very prominent message for this day and age, in which our entire worlds are put up on display on social media and become entertainment for other people to consume. We are very much living in a reality where our everyday life and this kind of fantastical versions of ourselves is very much meeting in these online spaces. So it's actually a pretty strong message to be having, but I'm just not 100% sure that that's where he was trying to go with it. I just felt like there were a lot of threads that he was putting in throughout this whole movie. I just don't think all of them tied up neatly into one bow. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Maxxxine. I'm disappointed, but I'm not surprised. Like, I was kind of going into this movie with the expectation that it was not going to be as great as X or Pearl. There was just something about X and Pearl that it seemed like both Ty West and Mia Goth were really riding this like creative wave that they were in, right? It was like right at the beginning of the pandemic. They were stuck in, I think it was like New Zealand, where they were filming X. And then they just kind of had this idea to film Pearl, which is kind of hilarious because I feel like Pearl is actually the best out of all three of the films. But it does seem like they were riding this very organic creative wave, right? And they were able to make these two really great films. And then Maxxxine was just kind of the film that came after that, right? I don't think they quite caught on the same wave as they did when they were making the other two movies. But as far as film trilogies go, especially horror film trilogies, I think this is definitely one of the better ones that we've gotten. And again, it's not like Maxxxine is a terrible film. I just think it's a little bit all over the place. I'm still a fan of Ty West. I still love his work. I'm still gonna look forward to other stuff that he does. What did you think of the film? Did you enjoy it? Were you disappointed? Do you think this is a fitting conclusion to the trilogy? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and I will see you next time. Thank you so much for watching.